Can I welcome all members and officers to this meeting of Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee 1, which has been convened as a hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed as soon as possible following the meeting. The meeting agenda pack can be also viewed on the Council's website. Everyone participating in the meeting will be attending it either from the Council chamber or from remote locations. Should I, as Chair, experience any technical difficulties during the meeting, it has been agreed that Councillor Amanda Williams will step in temporarily as Chair, and in her absence, Councillor Tim Thomas will step in. Members attending remotely must keep their cameras on for the duration of the meeting. However, all attendees should keep their microphones off until invited to speak. Members and officers can indicate they want to speak by pressing the hands up icon, and in the event of any vote, the Democratic Services Officer will call out the names of members who will then cast their vote. I will now proceed to the agenda of business and item 1, apologies for absence. Lucy, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we've received apologies for absence from Councillor John Paul Blundell, Councillor Joanna Llewellyn Hopkins, Councillor Heather Griffith, Councillor Hugh David will be joining the meeting but will be slightly late. The Corporate Director, Lindsay Harvey, will be leaving the meeting at 12. The Chief Executive, Mark Shepherd, has a prior commitment and cannot attend the meeting until 12:30. And we have Ravi Power, Chair of Bridgend Association of Secondary Head Teachers, is attending in place of Hannah Castle today, who is the Chair of the Schools Budget Forum, who is unable to attend.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Are there further apologies for absence? Please raise your hand. I can't see anyone indicating, so we'll go to item 2 on the agenda, and that's declarations of interest. If any member has a declaration of interest, please raise your hand. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a declaration of interest. I'm Chair of Governors at Coity Primary, and the head teacher is present today, so it's a personal interest there. And I'm also Vice Chair of Governors of Brinteg Comprehensive School. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Elaine Winstanley.
I'm an employee of Arwen Cultural Trust, who are mentioned in the MTFS on item 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Winstanley, and I'd like to declare a personal interest in that my husband is a music teacher in another local authority, and therefore I have a personal opinion on an item within the budget reduction proposals. Okay, I can't see anyone raising their hand, so we'll move to item 3, and that's the approval of the minutes of the 18th of November 2024. Could I have a mover and seconder?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Now we move to item 4, and our substantive item on the agenda today, the medium-term financial strategy 2005-26 to 2028-29. I will now ask the Chief Officer of Finance, Housing and Change to briefly introduce the report. Caris, please.
Thank you very much for that, Chair. Just to confirm for the recording, I am Caris Lord, Chief Officer for Finance, Housing and Change. So the purpose of this report is to present to committee the draft medium-term financial strategy for the period 2025-26 through to 2028-29. This sets out the spending priorities of the Council and the budget areas targeted for change in that period. The strategy also includes a financial forecast for that period and a detailed draft revenue budget for 25-26. Members will be aware of the financial pressures experienced in this financial year, brought about by increased demand for services and the impact of the cost of living crisis on both pay and prices. This level of in-year pressures is a continuation of what was experienced last year, and it does remain unprecedented. This challenging financial context has made budget planning for the coming financial year more uncertain and more challenging than usual. From paragraph 3.1.2 of the report, the current financial situation is outlined, together with the ongoing pressures that the Council will be required to meet over the coming years. There are a number of external pressures that the Council faces which continue to put pressure on the available resources, and these include such items as legislative change, much of which is not fully funded by Welsh Government, increased demand for services across all of our service areas, and demographic changes with the population numbers increasing. Welsh Government announced the Provisional Local Government Settlement on the 11th of December 2024. The final Local Government Settlement will not be announced until the end of February. Therefore, this proposed budget is based on the Provisional Settlement that we have received. The draft settlement sets out the revenue and general capital spending plans for the coming year, and the headline figure in relation to revenue was an overall increase of 4.3% across Wales, and for Bridgend, a reported increase of 4% on our Welsh Government funding. This was the 13th highest award across Wales, and you can see the spread of that between the different local authorities in Wales at paragraph 3.3.1 in your report. So the proposed medium-term financial strategy for the next 4 financial years has been reviewed based on the latest information that we have, and the document sets out for you the best, worst and most likely scenarios for the resources that will be available. So at paragraph 3.12.1, the potential net budget reduction requirement for the coming year is summarised, and based on the data available, the most likely scenario is that savings totaling over £40 million will need to be found between 25-26 and 28-29. So the draft revenue budget for the coming financial year is shown for you in Table 5 of this morning's report. The allocation from Welsh Government is higher than we were anticipating. We're still awaiting clarification on a few things. One of the larger ones is information outstanding with regards to how employers' NI will be funded for our staff and for those staff in our commission services. Within these estimates, we've assumed that the funding will be made available to fund those staff who are directly employed by this council. However, the position is less clear for those staff who are employed by other agencies but provide services for this authority. So this would include services such as social care, which is procured from independent agencies and homes, home-to-school transport, housing support services, and waste collection. Due to that uncertainty, £1.5 million has been included as a cost pressure so that the council could fund this if this money does not come forward. It's proposed to fund cost pressures of £14.4 million across the council next year, and the pressures are split between recurrent base budget pressures, in other words, overspends in the current year, which we don't believe services are going to be able to pull back, and also emerging pressures. For the Education, Early Years and Young People's Directorate, pressures of £2.7 million have been identified, and these are detailed at Appendix A. Budget reduction proposals of £9.1 million have been identified for the council as a whole. For Education, Early Years and Young People's Directorate, the proposed savings are £1.5 million. The medium-term financial strategy that was agreed back in February last year proposed a 2% reduction in the school delegated budget in 25-26. Due to the better than anticipated Welsh Government settlement, this has been reduced to 1% in these draft proposals. The details of the proposals are detailed in Appendix B for you, and Table 5 in the report shows a net increase of £7.3 million to schools next year, as the council will continue to fully fund the pay and price inflation implications next year for schools. And the draft budget that you have in front of you this morning is predicated on an increase in council tax of 4.5%. The report does outline the position with regards to capital going forward, but due to limited capital resources available, no additional capital bids have been requested for the coming financial year, although it is accepted that there may be other capital pressures going forward, and these will be updated for the final budget proposals when they come forward to Cabinet and Council next month. So this report outlines for you the proposed budget for the coming year and the longer-term financial position. These proposals are now subject to consultation with all scrutiny committees, hence this morning's meeting, and also the public consultation is now live and will conclude towards the end of this month. The findings from both of these exercises will be considered when drafting the final budget for 25-26. So if I may, Chair, I would just take you to the recommendations in Section 9 of this morning's report.
Thank you very much, Caris. And as I said yesterday, you can probably do that in your sleep by now. Thank you very much for outlining that report as briefly and succinctly as you possibly can. The remit of this committee is to discuss education matters, and as has been previously stated, if you do have questions on social services or communities, please let the chair of that committee know, or any members in your group, so that they could be reflected in their discussions, so that we don't duplicate our efforts. We'll now go to members, and I understand that Councillor Amanda Williams has a question on page 15, 16, 17 and 18. Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. I believe Councillor Ian Spiller had a question before me.
Okay, can I ask members to raise their hands then if they wish to speak? Councillor Spiller?
Thank you, Chair. My apologies. In the documentation, in seeking to continue to meet the council's identified priorities and protect its investment in education and early intervention, social services and wellbeing, and prioritise the most vulnerable in our society as far as possible, we're proposing the following changes in the 2025-2026 budget. That's the core of the text. Can I just ask, if the council's priorities are to protect its investment in education, then why is there a proposed cut to schools and also central education?
Thank you, Councillor Spiller. Who would like to take that? Caris, please.
Thank you for the question. I think the answer to that is that the council is unable to fund all of the pressures and all of the expenditure going forward, and then is having to make priority decisions. In coming up with this draft budget, all services were asked to put forward savings, and all services were also asked to put forward pressures, and then those have been considered and prioritised. And I think you see that the proposed budget does move in relation to education, so the savings for school has been reduced from 2% to 1%. And at the end of the day, it's a balancing act and an issue of balancing the risk between the money that's available to the council and how they wish to spend it on those priorities.
Thank you, Caris. Councillor Spiller, are you content? Would you like a supplementary?
I wouldn't go so far as content, Chair. I would just question the wording. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams, please.
Thank you very much. So my first question is, I touched on it yesterday with regards to the political stance, but this is aimed specifically now at education. So I've been looking at social media, and I asked the political question yesterday that our Labour MS and MP have both been sharing Welsh Government social media posts highlighting their investment in education. So one post I've seen from Sarah Murphy says, really excited to see over 225.5 million in funding come into schools, colleges and learning communities to help learners thrive across Wales. This includes boosts for teaching, additional learning needs, family engagement and even holiday enrichment programmes. Our children deserve a bright future, and that's why it's brilliant to see this money unveiled as part of the proposed Welsh Labour budget. And then another post says that the draft budget means investment into education to raise school standards and improve attainment, and that there will be increased funding in education. So in COSC yesterday, I asked the question overall with regards to why are some of our decisions in Bridgend Council, why are some of the MTFS decisions at odds with the Labour Welsh Government's priorities? Because how can Welsh Government say they're investing in education, yet our schools are being told they're going to get a cut to their budget in this MTFS? So that my political question today is specifically on the education element, schools and the central education services, as to why are we at odds, it seems, to Welsh Government's priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams, and I assume that's directed as the leader and the cabinet members. So would either of you like to intervene? The leader, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Williams. And let me first state that our objectives politically and corporately are not at odds with the Welsh Government. There is still a limited pot. Thankfully, we're not in the position we thought we were going to be in before. The settlement from Westminster was a lot better than we thought. And we could have been in a lot darker place. The figures we had to try and work with initially at the 0% increase of the revenue support grant. We're in a much better place, and we are investing in education. There is increases going to the school's budget and the education budget from year on year, albeit we have to cut the cloth accordingly and be realistic with what we have to play with. If somebody thinks that we can just continually not make any savings in education and just cut all other directorates, I think I'd love to see those proposals, because that's not being realistic. We are investing in education, and only this week in Cabinet we've agreed to proceed and asking for full council approval with Heronsbridge School at £60 million, schools in Kennelly taking it to over £100 million investment in schools, and I think we're one of the best in Wales at the investment we have undertaken in schools over the years. So our commitment is to education and protecting the most vulnerable, and we are in line with Welsh Government, but we have our own budget to deal with as well, and we have to be realistic of what we can achieve with that.
Thank you, Councillor Spanswick. I now bring in the Cabinet Member for Education, Councillor Martin Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I understand the concerns or the comments that are being made by Councillor Amanda Williams, but let's look at the detail here. You know, we are investing £150 million in our education services across the county borough. The increase in the budget that we've received from Welsh Government, 7.3 million extra will be made available for pay and pressures. If we look at our school modernisation programme, Councillor Williams' school herself, that particular school, has benefited from the school modernisation programme to the tune, I think it's nearly £1 million, to enhance the facilities at that school. So I don't accept that we are at odds or at variance to our colleagues in Welsh Government. In fact, I think we are supportive. And what we are in effect doing is the money that we are receiving from Welsh Government, we're sending directly to our schools. The 1% that is contained within the draft budget is a proposal. And this is the opportunity now today for members on the Scrutiny Committee to have a look at that proposal, give us some feedback. But if there is an alternative proposal, please present that to us today so we can consider. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Spanswick. Thank you, Councillor Jones. However, it's not a role of scrutiny to provide an alternative for you. It's to provide recommendations and conclusions for Cabinet to consider. That is not our role. It's to scrutinise your proposals as an executive. So I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't suggest that it's our position to do that. So I'll go back. Councillor Jones, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, but if there is a reluctance of the committee to not support the proposed 1%, then what I'm inviting the committee to do, Chair, is to give us an alternative. It's so easy to say, no, I disagree with that. However, you may wish to consider X, Y, and Z. That's like a collegiate approach, isn't it, to coming up to a solution. It's so easy to say, I don't agree with it. Fine, I accept that. That is a political choice. I get it. But what I'm asking as the person responsible for education is, work with me, give me an alternative to consider. And my commitment to this committee is, we will consider that.
Great, thank you, Councillor Jones. We'll obviously our remit today is to scrutinise your current proposals, and then we'll send those recommendations and conclusions back to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who will finalise those and send them to Cabinet for their consideration. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back with a supplementary?
I was just trying to clarify. I know you've clarified it's not our job to provide alternatives, but for me, how would we even begin to know where to get this alternative information from to give alternatives for cuts? We're looking at the proposals in front of us, so we don't have the information that Cabinet have to be able to come back either with alternative proposals. All we're looking at is what's on the table and what's in this report at the moment. We don't have any extra information. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a rider to that, that is an important consideration because we don't know what you've rejected. We don't know what proposals that came forward, the long list of proposals which have formed the basis of this current MTFS. So we're kind of running blind to a certain extent, as Councillor Williams suggests. So I'll come back to the leader who would like to come in on that, and then perhaps we can move progress.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure that's 100% accurate, as the information not been available. Our Chief Finance Officer, I think on many occasions, has provided the offer. If anybody prior to today and prior to this month and last month, information was needed on any of the proposals, that offer's been there for information to be provided. And so to say you haven't had, or individual councils haven't had access to information, I'm not sure that's 100% accurate. We're as open as we can be, and if any members at any time wanted information, you just need to ask.
I think during this process it would be interesting to see the long list so that we can provide that alternative, the preferences which we may have as the wider membership of the council, so that you can give some consideration to that. I know the Budget Responsibility and Evaluation Panel will start earlier this year, so that perhaps we can explore the different options available to Cabinet to consider for the next round of budget discussions which will take place over the course of the MTFS. And I know Caris and her team don't have all the resources to provide information to all opposition groups, but I know they'll do their best to engage with us all. Councillor Williams, are you content with that so we can make progress and bring in Councillor Spiller?
If I could just come back with one thing. I've actually met with Caris as group leader, and we've obviously had our group briefings. And that was one of the questions that we raised, is that we don't have this information. And one of the tasks that Caris left the meeting with was to go back to ask if we could have the information, because if you're political opposition in this council, we don't have the officer time to prepare a budget. We can ask questions of the officers, but we're not given the same information as places like Cardiff do. Their officers write their budgets based on political will, and then they're put forward. We don't have all of that here. So every time we're told, why don't you come up with alternative budgets as opposition? Because we don't have, it's not equitable. There's no equity here in what you get as opposition members. So we don't have this information. I have asked for it. I'm not going to go on about this now because obviously we're here to scrutinise this budget. But I want it made clear to the public that we are, in some respects, running blind here.
Okay, I'm going to move progress now. I think that's been well rehearsed on both sides of both the Cabinet and Councillor Williams's and my intervention. So we'll go to Councillor Spiller now.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I guess I'm going to pick up perhaps on what Councillor Martin Jones has just alluded to in the last paragraph of page 16. It simply says, unfortunately, despite the settlement we received for 2025-26 being an increase overall, it's still not sufficient to cover all of the things we need to fund. But isn't it fair to say that the MTFS is based on Q2 figures? And it's just been mentioned recently that there is a £12 million swing, which I appreciate is from a deficit, but that £12 million swing in Q3 is across council-wide budgets. So is there a room to improve the MTFS now it's known that we've come under budget this year? Thank you.
Thank you. Caris, please.
Thank you for that question. I suppose what I need to reassure you is that we did have more money in the settlement than we'd anticipated, and that there has been a much more positive outturn reported at Q3. The way in which that impacts on the budget that you have in front of you, though, is that, as I said, we have pressures in there of £14 million. 9.1 million is based on underspends in this year, which, having had discussions with services, we don't think they're going to be able to pull those back to zero, and then trying to make those services on a reasonable footing when they start in April. Now, what we are doing, and we've committed to do, is look at the difference between the Q2 figures and the Q3 figures to see whether or not actually we can reduce those pressures that we're pushing forward into next year. So if we are able to say that some of that spend has come down, and we can assure that it will be down for next year, we do have the opportunity to change those pressures that are built into the MTFS. And obviously then that will be considered as part of the final budget setting round.
Thank you, Caris. Councillor Spiller, you content?
I am, Chair, thank you. But just to confirm then, if the budget pressures after review didn't exist, then there would be the possibility of protecting schools' budgets completely.
Okay, are there any further comments? That was just a statement, Councillor Spiller. Yes, no question? Yeah. Okay, Councillor Williams, you'd like to come back in on other matters relating to pages 15 to 18, I believe?
Yes, so my next questions I've got on page 18, there's behaviour I wanted to tackle, but on page 17 I wanted to tackle the 1% cut, but I know that also comes up from pages 30 or 35 onwards, more specifically 40. So I think given that we've got apologies that we've got key members of staff leaving at 12. I wondered if you wanted me to bring those in with those elements of the report.
Yeah, if you don't mind. I know members may have gone through this with a fine-tooth comb and put everything in order during the report. So I do apologise for this, but I do want to try and tackle the elephant in the room, which is the school's delegated budgets, before key officers do have to leave. So I think I would agree with you, Councillor Williams, that we do that. So perhaps you could start off the conversation with school delegated budgets, and no doubt it'll be a significant discussion among all members. So over to you.
So did you want Councillor Spiller to come in first if he had a question before me?
Oh, if you wish. So, Councillor Spiller?
Yes, probably mine's specifically around catchment, so it probably would make sense to go before that. Midway down page 17, the council has a longer term goal to make the overall school system more efficient. For example, through making sure we've got the right number of school places available in the right parts of the county. Can I just ask, with this in mind, I'm aware of a number of requests for catchment reviews to ensure they're now fit for purpose. Given significant development in some areas and the planned development in other areas such as Island Farm and land west of Bridgend, what work is ongoing with regards to catchments, and when will this be undertaken to avoid a situation around capacity which happened previously at Mitre Hyle when Broadlands was built, and also at Coity Primary from Park Derwin?
Thank you, Councillor Spiller. Lindsay, please.
Thanks, Chair. For the purpose of recording, I'm Lindsay Harvey. I'm Corporate Director for Education, Early Years and Young People. Before I answer Councillor Spiller's important question, just to reiterate my apologies. Councillors may be aware that Estin are in with us this week, and I'm due to be interviewed at 12 o'clock, so hence my reason for leaving. With regard to catchment areas, I suppose there's two areas there. First of all, catchment areas, and then the second part of Councillor Spiller's question, which is important around planning for pupil places. This is carefully done in conjunction with the planning department within the local authority, and also with Welsh Government around our statutory duties, especially with regard to the promotion of the Welsh language. So this is very strategically planned over the space currently of a 9-year programme. Regular updates are obviously provided to Cabinet and to Council in respect of our school modernisation programme, and also we work very closely with Welsh Government with regard to the funding for these places. As far as catchment areas are concerned, we are currently reviewing Welsh medium catchment areas. This is necessary, as you'll be aware, that in Band B of the current Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, we are looking to increase our school estate. We're looking, especially in line with our WESP, our Welsh and Education Strategic Plan commitments, to increase the number of reception places for Welsh medium education, and we're seeing that then as growing the estate. So clearly, as part of that, we will need to review the catchment areas. As far as English medium catchment areas, that will be part of the review following on from the Welsh medium catchment area review, and that will be very closely aligned then to our Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, because they must work in tandem, obviously, as we create new schools in new places and as new planning developments come on board. Clearly, that's important. Councillor Spiller raises an important point. I was the inaugural deputy head teacher of my SILE, so again, I know firsthand some of the challenges around that. And again, we're very lucky in this local authority to have a very experienced planning team and our Sustainable Communities for Learning team headed by Gaynor Thomas, who are very experienced at doing this, and we are more than happy to provide regular updates to Scrutiny or other elected member bodies on this.
Thank you, Lindsay. Councillor Spiller, you contend? Thank you very much. Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much. I will start then with the 1% efficiency savings. So it is discussed on page 17. So my first question on this was, I know we've had in previous scrutiny meetings, we've looked at what the deficit recovery, what the deficit plans were, what the deficits in schools were with 2%. However, I think we only had 5 schools who had factored 2% into their deficit recovery plans, and we'd asked for that information to come back. But I wondered now, if there's a 1% cut, what the difference is and what the proposed figure will be for deficits for schools. And then as a right to that, I wondered if I could ask our head teacher colleagues who were in the meeting what a 1% cut would mean to them in their schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Come to Lindsay first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Williams. I'm not aware of any modelling that's gone on the 1% at the moment, but clearly we would need to do that. I think one of the things we just need to be careful to consider as a committee is there are a number of interdependent budget issues here as well, not just the delegated schools cut. So again, once we get the general picture in and once we get a further idea and council determination around the MTFS, we'd be happy then to model the entirety then of the impact or otherwise on schools.
Thank you very much, and perhaps we can go to our head teacher colleagues who are representing the School Budget Forum. We'll go to Jonathan Lewis first.
Good morning. Thank you. Jonathan Lewis, Head Teacher at Coity Primary School and Vice Chair of the Budget Forum. There was a healthy discussion at Budget Forum this week regarding the impact of these cuts on schools. They're mostly laid out in the MTFS. However, there were additional points that head teachers wanted Council and Cabinet to consider, although they acknowledge this is a very difficult task. We realise the situation we're in and education has to play their part in the overall picture. They were conscious that there were legacy decisions within the proposals that will directly impact on life chances for children and young people. We know by slimming down on these budgets that it will have an impact on our children. We are already seeing cases of increasing exclusions in schools, staff being harmed by challenging behaviour, other pupils being harmed. These are additional risk factors that haven't been factored into the risk portfolio here. But also all the additionalities that we try to provide our learners day in, day out will go with these ongoing costs. I think one cluster shared that how will they be expected to keep setting a balanced budget if every year it's been reduced, and at one point we are going to get to unrecoverable deficits. I think that cluster reported their staffing expenditure being 104% before they even look at their utility bills and all their additional points within their budgets, and I think that is across several schools now. It's the stress that the loss of staff have on other staff. So we are going to have to pick up the weight of other colleagues, but we always want to do the very best for our children. And if anything, schools will always try to be creative with the resources they have to meet the needs of their children and their communities, because we are first and foremost about our children and communities. And we will always try our best regardless of these cuts. We do acknowledge that this time last year, I think we were looking at 5% cut to budgets that went to 2%, and now we're at 1%. So we haven't had such a response as we did last year. There was quite a discussion amongst colleagues about the impact of the 5%. That isn't the case this year. Colleagues are interested to note that certain things have disappeared that were quite emotive topics last year. For example, the cut to nursery provision, the merging of schools and closing of schools, that has been discussed that they they've disappeared from these lines, and there are polarised views about those cuts as well. I think Mr. Power might want to come on about his from his point of view as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, for that insight. I'll call upon Rafi Power now.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, and thank you everybody for inviting me today in place of Hannah Castle, who's the chair of the School Budget Forum, and she's asked me to stand in her place. I'm the head teacher at Bryntyrion Comprehensive School, and I'd like to echo some of the comments that were already made by Jonathan. I did read just recently in December the report prepared by Audit Wales on the financial sustainability of local government. And its impact upon schools and school budgets last year. And I was quite struck by the observation that there were significant permanent reductions in school balances last year, amounting to £253 reduction in funding per pupil in Wales. And that was a significant figure for me to consider when I have over 1,000 children in compulsory school education. That's a reduction of around £250,000 from school balances, and that is a permanent reduction that on average across Wales, when applied to my school, that is something that I've had to build into my budget. And simple things that we've had to do is reduce the curriculum when people have left. For example, I didn't replace a Welsh teacher or a maths teacher or a pastoral support officer. And in doing so, that's meant that I've had to increase class sizes and reduce the number of form groups in each year group. And that in itself then provides challenges in terms of workload for staff and less individualised support for teachers in the classroom. And that is a permanent cut. I also know that there are currently schools who are facing unrecoverable deficits potentially next year, and that in itself is going to be unmanageable in the sense of trying then to look forward to a 1% cut on top of something that's already considered unmanageable. So how schools will cope with that in the next round is dependent on many factors. I understand that when you look at a 1% cut, you're also having to think about the increases in grant funding that potentially will be coming our way, because we were informed that in addition to the local government settlement this year, there will be further grant funding for schools. Now that's very, very useful for us in supporting teaching and learning and the additional learning needs element, and also working on things like attendance that we really have to improve in schools. However, that is not a permanent investment in schools in the way that a reduction in a school budget is a permanent reduction. And so that's something that we are going to have to think about when we put our plans and thoughts together. For me as a secondary school head teacher, I've been sitting down today projecting forward our curriculum plans for the new curriculum. I'm sure you're all going to be aware that from 2025 to 2027, there are huge changes in the qualification system in Wales. And one of those things will include, investment in training and in new courses to fulfill the requirements of the full offer and the skills for work and life. That is not going to be an easy challenge over the next 2 to 3 years when we are already factoring in potentially 1% reductions in funding when we're looking to fulfill the national mission and the qualifications framework as it changes. So there are significant pressures and challenges on schools that I would urge members to think about when considering this 1% cut in the next year and the years to come.
Thank you very much for that sobering response, Mr. Power. We'll go back to Councillor Williams now to see if she would like to make a supplementary question based on your responses.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, my supplementary, I was going to raise it later on, but I think it's important now, was what was said firstly about grant funding, and I know this report does say there's potentially significant grant funding to come in, but as we have this discussion, and I had this discussion with Caris yesterday generally about grants are a one-off. They are there for a specific purpose. They are not there to plug the gaps in budgets. They are there for a specific. Your PDG grant is your pupil deprivation grant. It needs to be spent there on those pupils who need that additional support, need that additional money. It's not there to pay for your electricity bill because you're already spending 104% on your staffing when you've already reviewed your staffing structures. And I know as Chair of Governors in Coity, our staffing bill is over 100%. We've reviewed our staffing. We're a new, nice school that's expanding as well. So it's very difficult. There is no cuts to be made. It's a full school. We can't merge any classes because we've got 30 children in a class. We haven't got anywhere to make those cuts. So I think for me, looking at that, grant funding is not an answer. And I have significant concerns that teachers might be worried that they need to try and plug gaps with this grant funding that's coming in. So that's just what I wanted to say there. I've got more questions I'll raise later on, but I'll give other people an opportunity to come in.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I think it's appropriate for me to just say one thing before I bring in colleagues. I won't direct this at our school budget forum representatives because I don't think it would be appropriate for them to respond. But perhaps I can ask the leader or the cabinet member to respond. The head teacher of Pencoed Comprehensive School, Mr. Jones, has said on Twitter or X, and I quote, "Never push a loyal person to the point where they walk away and no longer give a damn." I'm not sure how other Welsh head teacher colleagues are feeling, but if school budgets are cut again for 2025-26, I will walk away. My role is to lead and improve the life chances of learners, not lose sleep over a funding system that is so out of tune with actual costs. Enough now. Do you agree?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a very emotive statement, and you could apply that to any directorate or any part of this council in many ways. Everybody's been pushed to the limit when it comes to dealing with budgets. And we are, as was stated at the beginning, trying our best to protect education and most vulnerable and other services in authority. We cannot look at one part of this authority or one part of the service provided in isolation. And I would like to remind the Head Teachers Forum and those here today in Scrutiny from this time last year, where we were proposing quite drastic cuts of 5%, and then 1% and 1% and 1%. And the message came back from the head teachers, they prefer, albeit wouldn't welcome it, 4 years of 2% cuts so they could plan accordingly. They knew what was coming. We didn't do that. And we're not proposing to do that this year. We propose trying to bring things back. And these are proposals, draft proposals, 1%. There's still opportunities to change that. We need to look at the whole budget and what comes from all the scrutiny committees. So nobody wants anybody to leave and feel they're pushed out because there's no alternative. But we have to be realistic of what the money we have and cut the cloth accordingly. If budgets and schools are predicting 103% or 100, that there's not enough budget just to keep the staff there, they have to look at what can be done. And I would question, this won't be popular, but maybe some schools have non-teaching deputy heads, non-teaching other posts. They have to look at all these posts because I've seen that in my time as a governor. I'm no longer governor for some schools. They have to be realistic because we cannot look at this in isolation while at the same time we want to protect and enhance what we're doing in education. But we cannot just look at one part of this authority in isolation. And as stated previously, we have invested in education. And there's been many years, I've been here many years, where cuts that were proposed to education were taken off. There's been occasions where there's been cuts proposed, we've got the budget, and we haven't made the cut in education, but it has had a detrimental effect across the other parts of the authority. We cannot no longer operate as the authority just treating education in isolation. We want to protect education, look after the vulnerable, and look after our communities. But we all have to work together at it.
Thank you, Leader, and I'll ensure that Mr. Jones receives your response. Councillor Jones, would you like to come in with any supplementary remarks to Leader, or has he
No, thank you, Chair. Can I thank Mr. Lewis and Mr. Power, or representatives from the School Budget Forum. I think the very fact that the leader of the council is here, the deputy leader, the finance cabinet member and myself, we are here and we are listening. I think, and take some reassurance from that. We are listening to the difficulties that you're experiencing at the coalface of delivering education services across the county borough. But we're not alone. I think the 22 authorities across Wales are all in the same situation. The process, as I said today, is to listen, to take on board the views that are going to be expressed by not only Scrutiny Committee members, but by members of the School Budget Forum. And we will listen and we will consider. But again, when I sit around the Cabinet table, I'm very mindful that I have a corporate responsibility to support Cabinet colleagues who have responsibilities for social services, who have responsibilities for communities and regeneration. And it's difficult sometimes. But the reassurance today is we are here, we're listening, and we will take on board any views and representations that you wish to make. Thank you, Chair. Oh, can I just add as well, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Jones in Pencord Comprehensive School. He is an incredible school leader. He had a very, very good Estin report, and I got a lot out of that visit is listening to somebody who is very experienced. And in fairness, I found him very obliging and very forthright during my visit, but he was also someone who struck as being someone who was very, very cognizant of what was going on in the financial climate at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. I'll now bring in colleagues and go to Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, apologies for being slightly late. I was on deputy mayoral duties, and that's the reason I wasn't able to make the pre-meeting. The challenges that schools face in Bridgend and the challenges that Bridgend County Borough Council face, financial challenges and difficulties, are not unique. And the Cabinet members alluded to that. Can I ask then, have we got much information yet about the approaches that have been taken by other local authorities across Wales to set a balanced budget in these circumstances, particularly in regards to education and with regards to school budgets, please, Chair?
Thank you, Councillor David. Lindsay?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor David. I can give the ADU perspective on this as the Association of Directors of Education in Wales, albeit not the finance subgroup. Just to echo really what Councillor Jones has said, all local authorities in Wales are in the same position as Bridgend. All of us are facing challenging budget decisions. There is no formal picture yet, because obviously all local authorities in Wales are in the process of setting their budgets. One of the things that I'm very keen to do with ADU is to look at this as soon as that progress has been developed. And as soon as we have that, and we have a wider Wales picture, again, I'm more than happy making that information available. But at present, unless Judith is involved in some of the ADU finance discussions, I'm not aware at present of any all Wales picture. No, Chair.
Would you like to come in and add any supplementary remarks?
Sorry, in response to Lindsay Harvey, ADU are collecting information on schools' balances compared to last year, so we haven't had the results, but we have submitted information on a Bridgend basis. Thank you.
Thank you for that information. Councillor David, you contend with that?
I would like to come back in, if that's okay, Chair, and building on that point, just I wanted to ask if there are any emerging alternative proposals that other local authorities have considered, given, as I say, that the pressures are similar. They might not be identical, but they're similar across Wales. And again, it's a related question, but has well, we know the Directorate has considered alternative reductions to school reductions within the central budget, and perhaps we can have more information about that. We see some of the proposals here today, but that would be my other question because obviously it's related to the choices faced by the Directorate and the proposals that we have before us today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David. Lindsay, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor David. Again, to reiterate, really, we're more than happy to share the Always picture as soon as we receive the same. We have contributed the challenges. I think it's fair to note that when the last ADU meeting was just before Christmas in person, I think there were 3 areas that I think all local authorities in Wales are wrestling with. And these are identified both within our pressures and our overall budget position. First is around the challenges with home to school transport. All local authorities, as I'm aware, are finding the same challenges as a Bridgend. Pupil behaviour and the support thereof is definitely something that's challenging other local authorities. And I think the other one, which again is sizable in its cost, is with regard to the provision for pupils with additional learning needs. But again, just the commitment there, Chair, and again to Councillor David, as soon as we receive the All Wales picture, we're more than happy to share that.
Thank you very much. Now move to Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Thanks, Chair. I had a question on the impact budget cuts. I picked up on it on page 40, but I think it equally applies here at this stage, if that's all right with you, Chair. Also had a question on legal services and the impact to schools. I can wait a little bit later for that one if you want. But my question in regards to budget constraints is really that I think it's really positive that the 2% revenue cut to schools has now been reduced to 1%. I'd like to see that reduced further. Happy to continue to work with Scrutiny and the Cabinet to look at measures to try and reduce that further. We've also learned a bit about some capital funding as well, which is equally positive. Might question why some of these school assets got to this situation in the first place. But what I'm really concerned about, in addition to the 1% cuts directly to schools, is the 2.4% cut to the Education Directorate. And obviously all directorates have to bear the brunt of cuts. But what I'm concerned about in this regard is that the 2.4% directorate cut, it's going to chiefly impact schools. So I feel it's like a sort of double attack, double financial attack. So I'm just wondering, has there been any analysis on what the 2.4% education directorate cut will actually mean for schools in terms of financial challenges?
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Lindsay, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Thomas. Yes, I suppose one of the key features is we try to reduce the impact on the learner. That's the key focus for my directorate, and in line with this council's priorities around protecting the young vulnerable people in our schools, is to make sure we provide services to them. It is a challenge, and again, it is a balance, and there's 2 areas there, and I'll address parts of the question in turn. So first of all, with regard to the question on the rolling programme and how we address that with our school assets, well, of course, it is a rolling programme. We identify maintenance across all of our school buildings, and we rely heavily on the school maintenance grant that comes forward from Welsh Government, and that forms part of the money that's available from Welsh Government announced by the Cabinet Secretary in December. This year, we're expecting around 1.8 million of that, and that obviously helps to prioritise some of the most needy schools and providing safe environments for learners and for other site users. With regard then to other areas, I think there are 2 aspects. First of all, the delegated schools funding, and as Councillor Thomas says, the central services then that impact directly on the learner. There has been a lot of debate and discussion within my directorate, and obviously then with other directorates, to make sure that we look at reducing the impact wherever possible. I would draw members' attention to the budget pressures appendix of this report. And again, you will see there a significant investment in some areas that will directly impact upon schools. So, for example, significant over £1 million of funding for additional learning needs in our schools, and that will directly impact, obviously, on schools. A variety of investments in specialist facilities for learners with autistic spectrum disorder and for moderate learning difficulties in a range of settings, again, to support the needs of schools, and which have been identified by the School Budget Forum. And in addition to that, we look at additional funding for those learners who are open to services from youth justice and also youth services, again, that are featured heavily within our budget pressure relief programme. So again, to answer Councillor Thomas's programme, yes, it is considered in the round, and also with regard to the budget pressures that have been identified, there's a significant investment then to support schools in this area.
Thank you, Lindsay. Councillor Thomas, would you like to make a supplementary remark?
Just that really, that's great, and thanks, Lindsay. But at this stage, you're not able to give an actual monetary term of what this potential directorate cut could mean to individual schools. I know it's probably very challenging because it's not a one size fits all cost, is it? Because there's different schools that have different needs and require different support from the directorate. But just suffice to say, you can't give a figure of what the 2.4% cut would mean to individual schools.
Sorry, Lindsay, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. That's correct, Councillor Thomas, not at this moment in time.
Lindsay, as a rider to that, I've said this previously in budget responsibility evaluation panel meetings to both you and to Caris. It just appears as if we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, because in order to balance the council's budget, we are heaping pressure on schools' delegated budgets, forcing them into further deficits. So, we've got surpluses of up to 10% in certain schools and deficits of up to 40% in others. So, how can we explain such a huge difference in the management of school funding? And it would be useful to have an explanation as to why we have to transfer our deficits onto schools. It just appears to be a false economy in that we have to balance our budget while meaning that schools come under increasing pressure. So I don't know whether Caris or you can answer that question as to why we have to balance our budget by heaping pressure on other schools. Caris?
I think if you look early on in the report, we talk about the value of the savings that this council has made over the last X number of years, and that's at 88 million. Actually, the percentage of that has been directly related to schools is quite small. It's about 8 million, isn't it? So I think there's been a lot done to try and protect it. I'm not sure that we're trying to pass on all of our deficits through to the schools, and that data there about how much we've saved as a council and how much we've been asking for schools in that period would support that comment, really. I think, as Lindsay said, and he can come in much more eloquently than I can on this, there are pressures proposed in here to support services which hopefully actually, although they're going to central education, they will have a direct impact and support schools when they are trying to deal with some of the behavioural issues and the ALN issues that the schools are facing. By trying to shore up centrally, that should alleviate some of the pressure that's going through to schools. But I'm sure Lindsay can talk a bit more eloquently about that.
Thank you, Caris. Lindsay, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think it might be helpful, Chair, if I can just sort of set out some of the way the funding is allocated to schools, because you'll see the differences then between schools. Now, far and away, the largest proportion of funding to schools is based on pupil numbers. Now, when we see big changes in pupil budgets, more often than not is to do with changes in the number of pupils in the school. And I think it's around 70% of that funding is based on pupil numbers. In addition, then, there's a range of other areas, such as rates, building maintenance, etc., then that supports school budgets. There are also, as you know, Chair, some school-specific factors with regard to Welsh medium schools that we fund slightly differently. And in addition to that, there are a range of supports that we give schools in relation to provision for additional learning needs. In addition to that, and the core funding with regard to the age-weighted pupil unit, as we've discussed in the past, which is uniform across different sectors, for example, nursery, reception, key stage 2, etc. In addition to that, there's a range of additional funding measures that come into schools. Now, we've touched briefly on in this morning a range of local authority grants that come from Welsh Government, for example, the Local Authority Education Grant, and for secondary schools, the Post-16 Grant. In addition to that, there is obviously commercial opportunities for schools with regard to hiring of the premises and in some cases school meals income. So it is different in each school. One of the challenges we do have, and I know this has been discussed previously, is with regard to flattening some of the pressure on schools, is whether or not those schools in surplus, their funding can be clawed back then to support those in deficit. It's not generally accepted across Wales that that's a common occurrence, because we see these fluctuations between schools. And what happens within a year, then you might see one school use their surplus to flatten a deficit in another, and that might lead them to become in deficit the following year. So generally speaking, we avoid that. But there are differences, and again, these are all set out within the financial scheme for schools.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. It's just that it appears to me that following Mr. Lewis's perspectives on this particular issue, that we are forcing schools into an unrecoverable deficit position by heaping pressure on them year on year. And with regards to balance and equity, it'd be interesting to hear from our head teacher colleagues about whether they feel that this is something which they would consider as appropriate, because we've got, as I mentioned, some schools carrying up to 10% surpluses, with other schools carrying more than 20% deficits. So do you think that it would be appropriate for those schools with surpluses to balance their equity to ensure that other schools can recover their deficits more quickly? Would you work in a collaborative way, in a federation way, to be able to work together to minimise the deficit position? Perhaps I can bring in Mr. Lewis or Mr. Power.
Shall I go first, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, we're in one of those schools that's in a fortunate position that we do still have a positive balance that we've used this year to actually deal with the deficit that came last year, the budget deficit that came last year. We've set we haven't set a deficit budget for this year, but potentially, because of the permanent nature of the cuts has already taken away our balance, we will be starting from a position of deficit recovery. And that is that tells a story, really, doesn't it? That schools are a different continuum in terms of budget reduction. Some schools are further ahead and are further in trouble, and others are getting there because they have to, year on year, account for the monies that have already been taken away from their budgets through the permanent cut last year. So we're starting from that position. I think it isn't always the case that schools make permanent reductions. They make efficiency savings, and that sometimes is exacerbated if those permanent cuts aren't made immediately. And I think that if, for example, my school was then chosen to support another school in terms of using our own balance, it would then mean that the starting point for deficit reduction will be even higher the following year. And I think that would be a real challenge for schools in terms of making it equitable.
Thank you for your insight there, Mr. Lewis. Do you have anything else to add?
The only point is about possibly how we're running our deficits. You know, I am in a school that's in a deficit. It was £205,000 deficit when I arrived. We got it out of deficit and now we're back in it. One of the modelling scenarios for us at the moment is a £750,000 deficit. And to get out of that, I would have to make, on average, 10 teachers redundant and run my 16 classes with 5 teachers. And that is a scenario we've had to run through, because we don't have the income to make the cuts elsewhere. We are grateful for the additionality we get for electricity and some of the utilities from Bridgend Council, but when you look line by line, to get the big hitters is salary costs, and to get out of that £750,000, I can't run a school with 5 teachers with 16 classes. The numbers don't make up, but that is the reality if the cuts keep coming.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Lindsay has to leave now. Thank you, Lindsay, for your attendance, and no problem. Thank you very much indeed. Just to build upon that, I just can't see that some schools will be able to fulfil their significant deficit recovery plans without compromising educational outcomes. But I've made significant contributions, so we'll now hand over to colleagues. I know the leader would like to come in first, and I'll bring in Councillor Spiller, Hughes and Williams. Leader?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just, if I can, refer to, I think at the start, Councillor Thomas's question, talk about the central education budget and the knock-on effect that could have within schools. And on table 5 on page 38, we have the whole council draft revenue budget there. I just want to give a comparison because the central education, early years and young people budget this year, just for 30 million, 174. The proposed budget for 25-26 is 32.597 million, 2.5 million increase in budget. And just to give a comparison of how we're trying to be corporate across the board now, so the community's budget of 33 million will increase to 35 million. So that will increase by 2 million. So across two directorates there's a similar approach, albeit central education still having a larger rise than other directorates. So it's gone from 30 million to 32.5 million. Because Thomas talked about a 2-point-something cut, but overall, it's not a cut. It is an increase, and the director referred to budget pressures trying to be dealt with within the central education budget. It's not easy. Nobody wants to make cuts. Nobody wants to be in this place, but we are trying to be equitable across the council.
Thank you very much, Leader. Councillor Williams, do I have, I think I made a note that you wanted to come in on this particular item as well. I don't know whether you'd like to come in now or defer to Councillor Spiller. I know he's been waiting some time.
I will be speaking lots, so I let other people take their opportunities and I can come back to it. That's fine.
Okay, Councillor Williams, many thanks. I'll bring in Councillor Spiller now then.
Thank you, Chair. Schools play a significant part in protecting or certainly assisting with the mental health of their pupils and our children. Given the proposed 1% cut and the declining picture around child mental health in Wales, I'm reading the report checking mental health support for children and young people in Wales, summary report 2024. 16% of children felt they got the right amount of support. 83% felt their mental health needs affected their schooling the most. By taking an additional 1% from school budgets, my question is to the head teachers, do they feel that this will affect children and their outcomes greater?
Thank you, Councillor Spiller. I would like to take that first. Mr. Power?
I think any reduction in the school budget will impact upon children, particularly you mentioned disadvantaged children, of course, and we're just looking at some of the additional cuts across the directorate in terms of things like home to school transport, which in my view is going to have quite an impact upon schools perhaps in lower income areas where perhaps they won't have an opportunity to travel as easily as people who live more centrally. And I do believe that that's going to have an impact on things like attendance, the ability to access courses post-16. All of those are challenges that children and learners living in more disparate areas of Bridgend will find more complicated with that lack of transport. So that's just one thing. And then in terms of a budget cut of 1%, I'm not sure if I was articulate enough to explain that last time, taking out of my budget with a 2% cut last time, took away our balances that year. And so I'm looking for efficiency savings, and I can't easily do that through removing teachers. I don't want to do that. That's the hardest part of the job. So I'm looking at support services that last year I had to reduce in terms of pastoral support within our wellbeing team by 2 members of staff who left and were not replaced. And it means that with the reduction also in counselling services potentially around the wider directorate cuts, that will mean that I have got fewer people to work with children who potentially have got those emotional needs that you refer to, Councillor Spiller. And that in itself is a challenge when we're trying to address the issues such as anxiety and base school attendance issues, school absence. And that is a real challenge for us. So to reduce by another 1%, I think next year we will be looking at the wider support systems within the school that we perhaps would have to reduce in order to balance our books.
Thank you very much, Mr. Power. Councillor Spiller, would you like to come back on that at all?
Yes, if I may, Chair. Is it fair to say, Mr. Power, that there are rising challenges with regards to pupil behaviour, with regards to emotional support needs? So therefore, based on all the information that's available, both through Welsh Government, through the press, there's actually a need for more funding for this greater emerging pressure, rather than reducing school budgets and putting more pressures on the schools and obviously on the life outcomes then of the pupils.
I think the grant funding is helpful, but it's only temporary. And once you put something in, at one point we're going to have to take it out. And that's the nature of the grant funding that's coming our way. We are looking for additional money in the local authority education grant this year, in-year funding. But that will come really late in the school financial year, that we can't easily put into place very, very quickly. So it isn't helpful necessarily to put that money in at a late stage of the year, because you can't use it fundamentally to support those children on a more permanent basis. My major concern is, yes, you're absolutely right. There are huge exponential rises in the number of children who are requiring support through health for ND pathways, and the waiting lists for children to access these support services is becoming much, much longer, 2 years sometimes, for a position with a health service to support somebody who's on an ND pathway. And so all that kind of work comes back to the schools to support those children in the meantime before they get that health support. And that is exponentially rising for certain. We've got a wonderful support system in our school through our ALN team and our wellbeing team and our pastoral team. And I would be so reluctant to have to take any of that away at this moment in time, because the rise in need is growing so steadily and so exponentially.
Thank you very much, Mr. Power. Mr. Lewis, do you have anything else to add?
No, I guess it's outside this council as well. To add on the point that Mr. Powell made about the ND referrals on the rise, where GPs are generally supporting parents to contact schools to make referrals. And now I know they're changing the process where they are promoting that children don't need a diagnosis to get the support that they require. But we won't have the support at a school level to give these families. And there will be an expectation on us from health to provide that service in school, and that support won't be there. And each school is funded very differently. So the profile and the support package we can put around young children will vary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Councillor Spiller, you content so we can move on to other members?
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Councillor Hughes, please.
Thanks. So my question and comments are related to the deficit budgets again, and it might be me not really understanding how all the financial things work. But when we were sent the extra information, which is showing the current deficits the schools are in, you know, you're talking an awful lot of money in a lot of schools. And this, I picked up on what Mr. Lewis said about, so a school, the main budget is the staff. So the school doesn't take on staff when people are made redundant, for example. They've got the biggest size class that they can possibly have legally. They don't have any support in the Key Stage 2. They've got minimal support in the lower Key Stage. What do schools do if they cannot make the savings? I know we can say, and Councillor Spanswick did say, you know, everybody's got to be working hard to make these savings. And yes, I agree with that. But looking at those deficits, I'm sure they are not because a head teacher doesn't know how to manage a school or its finances, surely. So what do finance officers in the council do? What do we do? Because those deficits are there now. So for whatever reasons they've got of not been able to make the savings, for some schools, is it impossible for them to make the savings? It's just going to increase. And my lack of financial, and I just don't understand then that money isn't going to be saved, because it's impossible for some schools to make the savings and run their school, let alone have the extras. So if anybody could.
I think you build upon my comments and our head teacher colleagues' comments on unrecoverable deficit positions, which is why I say to local authority officers and cabinet members that it is robbing Peter to pay Paul, because you can just say, okay, fine, we'll make a 1% budget cut for schools' delegated budgets, but that forces and heaps on the pressure onto our head teachers to try and make some deficit recovery plans. And unfortunately, more and more schools are just going to fall into an unrecoverable deficit position, which is why I say it's essentially not a saving, because ultimately the local authority has to step in.
Yeah. Could I ask, though, what support then? I'm sure there's finance officers. I know the school does the budget, but what support does a school have then to say, look, this isn't, you've got to do this, you've got to say that. How? What expertise do they have in above and beyond? What's in that school to try and then recover the money?
Thanks, councillors. Would you like to talk about deficit recovery plans? Is somebody in a position to do that for us?
Well, certainly what we can do is just give you a run through of what we do by way of support, as Councillor Hughes was just talking about, really, so that when it becomes apparent that a school is slipping into deficit, the processes that we have in place to work with them, really. And I'd stress they're supportive. They're not draconian, they're supportive to try and help the schools look at things. So I know that some of the colleagues I've got with me here today have meetings with the schools, and they will have face-to-face meetings with senior staff in the schools to go through those deficit plans. And because they're working across all of our schools, they are able to share ideas, if you like, that have come up from other schools to see what is applicable in different school areas. And they do try and work well with the head teachers to look at those deficit plans and to try and amend them as much as we can to bring them back. I'm looking at Judith, sorry, because I know she does a lot of that work. Does that reflect what we do? Yeah.
In the termly meetings with the schools with the deficits, we do share ideas that maybe some schools have shared with us. So things like hiring out the premises, sharing caretakers, ways of increasing funding into the school. We also have in attendance, we have one of our senior officers who deals with the school improvement. We have the inclusion service with us, so we look at all different aspects of the delegated budget and how we can improve on the deficit and maybe look for alternatives.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hughes, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I suppose I know I should ask this. So in people's expert opinion then, are schools going to be able to recover their deficits?
Judy?
The only way that they will recover is to increase funding or reduce expenditure to bring that balance into line. So we are working closely with schools to aim to recover all of the deficits on, from the smallest deficit right through to the largest. We do work closely with schools on recovery, but it will be the big things like teachers that will bring in the most savings, unfortunately.
That's fine, thank you.
That's a very diplomatic response, but can somebody answer the question that I was asking about robbing Peter to pay Paul? Because you're trying to balance the books for the council. I fully understand that. You have to set a balanced budget, as Caris always tells us in every single finance meeting that we have. But do you realise that by balancing that budget and implementing a 1%, 2%, 3% cut, whatever it is, on our schools will force them further into an unrecoverable deficit position? So can I have a response on, you're just transferring our debt to another body which is within our statutory responsibility? Are you sort of getting my drift?
I am getting your drift, and I suppose what Judith has just outlined for you is that there's a lot of good working that goes on between the finance staff and those schools that are in deficit, and we're doing an awful lot of work with them to pull that back. But ultimately, some of them are going to struggle to bring those deficits back. So they do have a period of up to 5 years to bring those deficits back, and that's what the agreement is. But the reality is, if we reduce their budgets further, the likelihood of them being able to bring those deficits back within 5 years is less. And then we do have a position then about how do we actually, what do we actually do with those deficits as a council going forward.
What would we do?
Well, ultimately, the council has to underwrite them. So what we need to have, we need to be assured, don't we, from a finance point of view, that they're doing everything they possibly can to build that, to pull those deficits back. And that's what the work that the team do with those. But ultimately, if they can't pull it back, it's something that the council needs to underwrite.
So it's totally counterproductive. Potentially counterproductive if you have to underwrite them after an unrecoverable deficit position after 5 years.
It's not counterproductive because I think the work is ensuring that actually the schools are, we need to be reassured that they're as efficient as they possibly can be. But ultimately there will come a time where some of them will not be able to pull those deficits back.
Okay, thanks for being so frank, Caris. I've hogged this far too much, so I know Councillor Williams has got loads and loads of questions, so I'll hand over to her.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll kick off then with the fact that I meet monthly as Chair of Governors of Coity Primary with finance officers because we are one of these schools in deficit. Also, Bryn Teg, where I'm Vice Chair of Governors, is another school that's also significantly in deficit. So I meet monthly with finance officers. They are very good. They are very supportive. We look at everything, but in Coity, we've been told there's nothing else you can do. I'm Chair of Governors, and me and the Vice Chair of Governors are even now key holders. So we go and open up the schools outside of hours and on weekends to rent out any space that we can. We're doing everything. I've been a governor in Coity for 14 years. I've seen the old school close and move. I've seen the deficit that came when the school moved because of the way funding came with new schools at opening partially full classes, and I've seen Mr. Lewis claw his way out of a £200,000 deficit before by bringing in all of the things that we've brought in, like hiring out the space. We're lucky we hire out, we've got a childcare facility on site, the wraparound care for the mornings and the evenings. We are doing all we can. The leader said, oh, well, some schools have got non-teaching deputy heads. Our deputy head is a non-teaching deputy head because she is responsible for safeguarding. She is our safeguarding lead. She is our Elenco. So she deals with all of the additional learning needs. So, and she also then goes into the classrooms to support for PPA when necessary as well. So while she doesn't have a class, she doesn't, it's not 9 to 5 for her. She doesn't get out of there, and she works extremely difficult, you know, with difficult children and doing a lot of extremely hard work. There are schools like that. We've been told, can we look at a 10-year deficit recovery? Well, all we're going to be doing is building on that constantly. It's like when you buy a new car on finance, you don't pay off the finance, you buy a newer car. You're continuously increasing your debt as you go down the line. And that's what schools will be doing. And don't get me wrong, there are some schools who can make efficiency savings, but it's very difficult also. And I've raised this numerous times, and I've raised your argument last year about it's just transferring the deficit onto another sheet of paper. It's just, that's all it is, a paper exercise. It's the funding formula for schools is different as well. Coity is the third lowest funded school in Wales. The third lowest in Wales, the lowest in Bridgend County. Oldcastle is in the top 10. I think they must be 4th or 5th lowest funded school in Wales, because the funding formulas are different too. So you will see that there is a difference between deficit budgets in schools and who've got surplus and who've got deficits, because the funding formulas, there is £2,000-3,000 between some schools because of the funding formulas. Now, I get smaller schools have more money because they are very small, and you're paying for head teachers for small schools and everything. But in Coity, it's 104%, I think, our staffing structure is. And when we looked at options with finance, a teacher said, I only want to return 4 days a week. And they said, great, that's a saving of 1 day a week for a teacher. Well, somebody still has to teach that class of 30 children. We have got the bare minimum of staff. in there. So I wanted to add that as some context onto what was discussed. But my next question was on about behaviour, and it has been touched on, but I've seen behaviour change specifically since COVID, but staff in schools are struggling now with behaviour. I sit on an exclusion panel in Bryntegg School, and my emotions have been run ragged this year, listening to some of the stories of some of the children that I have sat and met with them and their parents who have been excluded. I'm aware other head teachers have come to me, other teachers have come to me, knowing I'm on Scrutiny Education, in tears. I have been in tears myself, listening to some of the stories of some of these children in our schools that I know we are failing. And it's not through the lack of the teaching staff or the support in there. It's because there are children who are in schools that shouldn't be in these settings. We've got a lot of children in mainstream schools, and it's mentioned in the report. I think it's on page 18 about you know, the need for specialist provision. We've got a waiting list for the bridge. We've got children who've been assessed that need schooling at the bridge, but there's no capacity, so they're on a waiting list. So schools are having to manage those children. And I know I've had cases where there's teachers locked in cupboards, fearful for their lives. Sorry.
Thank you, Adrian, on the basis that I couldn't work out.
Excuse me. Sorry, there's somebody
Could you
over talking me then.
And if you're not speaking, if possible, thank you.
Right, sorry. So I was going to continue on. We've had cases where there have been staff locked in cupboards fearful because there are children who themselves don't want to be in that setting. It's not the right setting for them, and yet schools are footing the bills to provide the support staff to keep children safe and to look after those children because they have a right to education too. And that's not included in this budget, the schools' budgets. The schools are having to put this support in for these children. And I feel that in the time it's taken 2 years maybe, because the only way to get children into the bridge is to get them excluded from 2 schools, is we're wasting 2 years of these children's lives, as well as head teachers having to find the funding. And I've seen it now. And as I said, I've been a governor for 14 years in Coity. And the amount of exclusions, even at the primary age now, it's increasing. We're in double figures, and we're being asked in primary schools to educate children who need to be in a specialist setting. And I wanted to ask the head teachers, and I know Jonathan Lewis would be able to give some examples of additional costs that come with making a school that's not suitable for children with specific needs safe for that child, because I know we've had budget costs that have come in that we've had to pay for to make the environment safe. So that was my first question there, is that if head teachers can either give any examples or agree or disagree with me, or give additional costs that come out of managing the behaviour that doesn't come out of the budget, so they have to foot the bill for, and also then making the areas safe for those children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Can I refer to head teacher colleagues to make a contribution? Should we go with Mr. Lewis first?
Thank you, Councillor Williams. We do have significant costs associated with trying to keep children safe. We are a school that's got a first floor with a balcony, so we have to make modifications in year sometimes where children are unable to regulate their behaviour, because we have a hands-off policy where we try and support children in the best way possible. So to keep the doors closed, it's £1,000 per door to keep the maglock to the school system, because obviously they've got to be linked up to the fire system, and we have to sometimes make those modifications in year to keep children safe and to keep staff safe as well, to make sure that children don't put themselves in compromised positions. In addition, if we didn't have a non-teaching deputy, it's very difficult if there's no other adult tracking those children through the school on how to keep that child safe. So it's about about the additionality we can provide with our non-class-based staff, which there aren't many anymore. So on a Thursday and Friday, my deputy is non-teaching. If I didn't have a non-teaching, we would have very little capacity to support young children with challenging behaviours in a school setting at a primary level. So it's about keeping learners safe at all times. Safeguarding is paramount to us. However, we would have challenges in doing so throughout the school day, but we will always try our very best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Power?
I think it's fair to say that there has been an increase in behaviour issues in schools. Absolutely, that is the case. Last year, we, for the first time, had to exclude permanently 4 children from school, 2 of whom were actually on waiting lists for external provision. But the school was trying to maintain an educational provision for them within school, whilst they'd already been delegated a place at one of the external provisions. And that in itself was a real challenge for us. What we have to do in those circumstances to keep everybody safe is to provide much more individualised support for children, and this comes with cost, doesn't it? So many of our young people now have to have one-to-one support in order to access mainstream education. We also had to invest heavily, as you have, Mr. Lewis, in safety arrangements within school. Not just safety arrangements, but nurturing environments to support children with emotional-based anxiety. Within school, for example, we now have a fully resourced hive, we call it, a resource centre for to provide support for children with such a range of needs. But this also has to then be supported by the staffing, and so we have increased support in our wellbeing, pastoral and behavioural support within the hive, in order to make sure that those children with those additional needs, those increasing behavioural needs, have got the support, the dedicated support they need. And that's the reason why the idea of trying to reduce that support will just cause more difficulties in terms of behavioural management and safeguarding within the school.
Thank you, Mr. Power. Councillor Williams, would you like a supplementary on that particular point? Councillor Williams?
Sorry, no. I'm sorry, I'm shaking my head. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It's force of habit.
See you shake your head. Apologies. Can I just make a plea to members to be as succinct as possible and laser focused on the actual budget headings, because we do have questions on all budget reduction proposals, all 12. So to avoid being here by 6 p.m, perhaps people can just be more succinct in their questions. And we'll have a short comfort break after the discussion on schools' delegated budgets. We'll now go to Councillor Thomas, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Actually, my question was on some of the budget pressures. It's not really listed. No, it's not on the budget pressures. I was going to ask a question on that, but I think Councillor Spiller has responded to that. I think we've naturally gone on to some of the challenges to schools, and I was going to ask the Director on legal services, but in lieu of the fact he's gone, I think it'd be really useful if the head teachers could help me on this. And in COSC, thanks to Councillor Amanda Williams's question, I think we learnt that schools are having to rely on external legal suppliers. And you know, I don't know about that particular contract, but my experience of external legal suppliers is that they can be quite costly. And I'm really concerned. We're touching on more and more complex casework involving behaviour, attendance, health and safety legislation. It must be an enormous minefield for educational leaders. I'm just wondering if the head teachers could help me. You know, what are the challenges with getting legal cover, and do they have any concerns in this regard, please, Chair?
Thank you. Should we go to Mr. Power first?
Yes, we do. Councillor Thomas have an external arrangement with a legal service, and that we've been with this service for a number of years. There can be some difficulties with the way in which we actually interact then with the local authority. because the circumstances could be the case where our legal team does not agree with something that has been determined by the local authority, and then in that respect there can be some conflict. It could be around a complaint of some sort, or an issue around GDPR. It could be anything really, but those services have had to be secured and procured by schools in the absence of any support from the local authorities' legal teams, because the local authority does not have the capacity to deal with the legal issues that the schools have, and that's the reason why we have to then source our support elsewhere. Similarly, then aspects around GDPR and working with. We now have an external organisation that acts as our data protection officer. Because there's no real capacity within the local authority to do that. And so, yes, these are expensive. We've had to roll back from from health and safety SLAs with external agencies because they really are expensive, and rely more heavily on the corporate health and safety support through our service level agreement. But other than that, legal and certainly some of the services around GDPR are ones we've had to source elsewhere. And there can be conflicts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lewis, do you have anything to add?
Just to echo Mr. Power's point, the organisation we deal with regards to our legal services have been excellent. They do turn around in a timely fashion to support schools, and they are knowledgeable, but the conflict comes where the local authorities legal team may not agree with the external legal team, and that's where some of the challenges that schools will find themselves in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thomas, you contend with that?
I am content. I'd just like to comment really, in my experience, from a non-education background in the field that I work in, I do work with external legal providers, and that is something I pick up on, conflicting advice between them and in my case, the government. And we've talked about, non-teaching leaders and things like that, but surely this is going to be more and more of a pressure for those leaders, I think, and that's got to be commented on how they can be supported in these very complex cases, because even though they get this external support, there still needs to be communication and liaison with these external legal providers, and that's going to lie on the leadership, I think, and that must be incredibly challenging in these difficult times, I would imagine. Thanks, Chair. That's all I got for that one.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Go to Councillor David now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for not raising this at the appropriate part of the meeting, but as we discussed earlier, colleagues discussed earlier, the a rise in demands on schools because of the additional learning needs. I wanted to ask about some of the budget growth proposals, because they are related. As you said, we need to consider the proposals in the round. So there's obviously a proposal for the establishment of a learner resource centre for foundation phase pupils. So I wanted to ask head teacher colleagues if that was welcomed, and indeed the proposal to establish another specialist class for pupils with autistic spectrum disorder. And of course, I know Mr. Power, with his experience and the expertise there at Bryntyrion Comprehensive School, I'd be interested in his views on that. And then a third question, again, because there's another budget growth proposal in the papers, which I certainly welcome. Any growth proposals around provision for children with additional learning needs is welcome in my book. But EEYP 10, I just wanted to ask for more details on that. No, apologies, I've got the numbers wrong, 9. So that's the 125,000 for specialist assessment and observation for children with emerging and complex needs. Is that actually a learning resource centre, or would that be observation of children in mainstream provision? And apologies, I can see the director's gone, but I would still like more details on that. And then also I'd be interested to know, again, because it's related and in the round, there's obviously pressure in learner support as a result of increased demand for additional learning needs and one-to-one support in schools of 1.3 million. So I know there's been increased pressure, isn't there, in that budget, and that certainly helps with some of those behavioural challenges and some of those emotional difficulties that some of our children experience. And I wanted to check if that was across the school system. I know there's certainly provision in primary school, but there's also some provision in our secondary schools as well. And I know the demand has risen. Is this big enough to meet that additional demand? Apologies, there's a number of questions there, but they are related in the round to that ALN provision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for raising ALN provision. I know a number of colleagues have got other questions on ALN later on in the meeting. I'm not sure whether any of the colleagues can answer those questions, to be honest with you, in the absence of the corporate director. I don't know. I doubt whether you'd be able to make a stab. Would you be able to make a stab? Deborah?
I can answer a little bit of it,
potentially.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the first budget pressure, that's one of the recurrent-based budget pressures. So that's obviously what's been reflected in the quarterly monitoring reports to Cabinet, which Scrutiny, Corporate Overview and Scrutiny see as well. That's in terms of current budget pressures and overspends in that area, and that's across all additional learning needs, particularly one-to-one, across all schools. So that's an overspend that we're currently incurring, and that would enable us to continue to meet the cost of that provision. So that's not additionality, it is the current position that we've got, and it's trying to manage that budget and make sure it's sufficient going forward. In terms of the other budget pressure that Councillor David mentioned, EYYP 9, that is a learning resource centre that I think Lindsay is looking to establish. As he mentions, there are set-up costs, one-off set-up costs as well associated with that. How that's managed and where the children come from and where that's going to be located, I couldn't give you that information. Lindsay would have to do that, but that is a provision to be established, I assume, within a school.
Okay, perhaps we can ensure that we get a response from that from the appropriate officers in the Education Directorate for Councillor David and colleagues. Can we just, I know we're going to go through the base budget pressures, the recurrent budget pressures and the budget reduction proposals in order later on in the meeting. Can I just ask whether there are any further contributions on the school's delegated budgets before we take a short break? Because I'm conscious of the fact that we have spent quite a significant amount of time on this. So, Councillor Williams, you have other questions on this?
I have one question and then I'm going to leave the rest for the end of the report. Apologies, I've just had some very upsetting personal news as well. So if I can just get through this quite quickly for you. It was for finance officers actually, and it's on page 31, and it was the transfers into and out of the 25-26 revenue settlement, and it's about teachers' pay and pensions. So I wanted clarity on that. And does that mean that Welsh Government are footing the bill for the increase to the teachers' pay and pensions? Is that what it's saying there? Thank you.
I'm very sorry to hear that you've had some upsetting personal news, Councillor Williams, but I'll ask Deborah to answer that question.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. So this is funding that we received as grants during this financial year. You obviously remember when we set the budgets for 2024-25, we knew that teachers' pensions were increasing, but we had no funding agreed at that time. So just before Christmas, Welsh Government provided us with the funding for the teachers' pensions, which we passed on to schools. But obviously that was a grant, and as we've said with grants, one-off. So what they've done now is they've passported that pension grant into the settlement. So that's obviously now gone into the base budget and will be there going forwards. The same with the teachers' pay. So the teachers' pay award was agreed for September 2024 at 5.5%, I think it was, off the top of my head. Obviously, when Welsh Government provided funding for 2024-25, they didn't know what the teachers' pay award was going to be. So they put an assumption into the settlement. They did acknowledge then that the actual award was higher than what they put in the settlement, so they provided a grant to us again just before Christmas to contribute towards the cost of that pay award. and the same with the pensions grant. They've now transferred it into the settlement so we can give it to schools to offset those costs going forward as well. So it's kind of not new money, but it's recurrent money to meet those ongoing costs.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams, would you like a supplementary on that?
Yes, please. It was just I was asking that because we had the I can't remember who said it now at the start of the meeting that they were trying to argue that there isn't a cut to education and to schools because schools were getting this money into their budgets. So the BCBC were covering the costs of this. But to me, that suggests the Welsh Government have given us that funding. So it keeps me still thinking that schools are still getting that 1% cut. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Anything further on that? No. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Winstanley?
Okay, so my question is a little bit on Welsh medium education, and I noticed in what Lindsay Harvey said earlier that the way in which their funding is done is slightly differently to those the English medium primary and secondary schools. So I guess what my question is we know that there are more deficits in Welsh medium schools. We also know that some of the schools sorry, are suffering particularly from poor buildings, in particular Ysgol Ferchysger, which is in desperate need of replacement, which is planned, I'm happy to say. And hopefully within the next 2 years, that school will have been replaced by a modern one. However, do we need to look at how we fund our Welsh medium education to allow for the fact that there are additional costs on Welsh medium schools because they also have problems with the additional needs for transport, etc. Though the actual home to school transport part is covered.
Thank you, Councillor Winstanley. Can you take that, Judith?
Just to confirm, the Welsh medium, say primary schools, are funded on exactly the same basis as the English medium primary schools, with the exception that they receive a lump sum. So we allocate a Welsh medium or Welsh language lump sum to the Welsh medium primary schools. Similar arrangement in the secondary schools. They are funded on exactly the same basis, apart from the Welsh medium lump sum that's allocated that doesn't go to the English medium schools. So that's the only difference in their delegated budgets.
Are you content with that, Councillor Winstanley?
Okay, thank you. That does help clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll take Councillor Spiller and then we'll have a short break. Councillor Spiller.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A question regarding the £122 million proposed delegated schools budgets. My understanding is that business rates are paid by schools, and it really is a question in 3 parts. Number one, can I ask the head teachers of Coity Primary and Bryntyrion Comprehensive how much their schools are paying towards business rates annually? And a secondary part then to, I suppose, probably the leader would be the best person to ask. Can I just ask what work is being done then by this authority to lobby Welsh Government on behalf of our schools to remove them from paying business rates?
Thank you very much, Councillor Spiller. Who would like to go first? Mr. Power?
I need to check that with my business manager, and I can come back to you after the break if you like, Councillor Spiller, for the exact figure.
Great, thank you. Judith can intervene here.
Okay. I just got to move to the right place on my spreadsheet.
Problem? Must have so many spreadsheets going, you can't keep track.
It's typical. Right. Bryntyrion pay business rates 116,334. With school rates is what we call an in-out, so they're funded exactly the same as they pay, so they don't gain or lose from business rate funding.
Okay, and I assume that's the same for Coity Primary.
Coity, it would probably be quite expensive. That we find the new schools are more expensive with regards to. I'm going the wrong way. Debbie's pointing the wrong way. Both new schools are more expensive with regards to business rates. Coity Primary is paying £64,068. I'm giving you 24-25 rates.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Spiller, are you content with that?
By the looks of it, Councillor Amanda Williams wants to ask my supplementary, so I'll leave that to her.
It seems so, so we'll go to Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much. I'm astounded that we're having to pay business rates for our schools, and that also BCBC are having to, what is an in and out, it's footing the bill for this. So I wondered if what we can do as a committee to also ask Welsh Government why schools are being charged business rates, because whilst it's in and out and the funding is there, it's still off the bottom line of the budgets. So it's still something that's coming out of those budgets that we need to show, because it's showing in the original budget, but then as a cost coming out as well.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I can see the Deputy Leader, Councillor Gebby, would like to come in. I hope your voice is better, Councillor Gebby.
It's coming back. Thank you very much. I've got much more sound than I've had for the previous few days, is what I want to say.
Great.
I think it's just coming in on Councillor Williams's point there. There's been lots of representations over the years around business rates, but I hasten to add it's not just around education. So public service buildings all pay business rates. And one of the reasons that Bridgend was, I want to say they set up such a really good model, but the reason that Arwyn and Halo, the leisure centres, any cultural venues, anywhere like that, they all pay business rates. But as soon as they're a charity or a not-for-profit organisation, they don't, which is one of the reasons why we transferred them out in Bridgend and why an awful lot of councils across Wales have transferred them out. But those representations have been made previously. There is something else I'd like to pick up on, and that's behavioural support as well. That's a big issue, and I know that I've been in discussions with the General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers, Laura Doyle, and one of our discussions is around behaviour support for educational purposes. And I'm doing that with my WLGA hat on at the Joint Council for Wales, and we do know the impact that it's having. I think what I would say to everyone is that's before our new pupils even get to school. We do think that COVID has got an awful lot to answer in relation to the behavioural issues that we are experiencing in our schools. And just like Councillor Williams, I am Chair of Governors, so I do see the impact of that and the difficulties that we face in trying to support those pupils as well. But those representations are being made, and I wanted to assure the committee. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gebby. Can I move progress, Councillor Williams, or would you like to come back on that? That's great. Okay, we'll call it a 10-minute break now and move on to discuss the budget reduction proposals thereafter, starting on page 55. So we'll call a 10-minute break and reconvene at around 1:05 if we may. Thank you.